In the discussion that we have just covered, one of the most distinctive characters of the integral yoga has been brought forward, and it is worth highlighting it, that having gone inward into realization of self, withdrawal even into absolute, when we reopen our eyes, the world is there still, and the self goes on with this aspect of divine expression in form, in universe. And in order to recognize what it is that we have missed, Sri Aurobindo says we have to concentrate again and see and realize also this which persists. And we realize that the self is none other than the Supreme Soul, which is also the Lord of nature, upholder of cosmic existence. And it is that which compels all its multitudinous actions and its perpetual cycles. And after that, once again, we must concentrate and know the self as the one existence which is both the soul of all and the nature of all, and therefore able to express himself in all these forms of things, and to be all these formations also, expressing through the forms and being the forms through which it is expressed. These last two steps correspond also to two important experiences which he has described in the last paragraph that we read, where it is possible to dwell exclusively on the realization of the divine in all forms, in all nature, even as it is possible to dwell exclusively in the realization of the divine as the self supporting all things. And in this last paragraph that we are at now, Sri Aurobindo synthesizes these realizations also. These also must merge into one deepest realization. But how are we to do that? Are we to concentrate on the divine in each form separately? Are we to concentrate on the divine in all the forms together as manifesting in the whole universe as a whole? Are we to concentrate on the divine who manifests within us? In the practice, we cannot obviously do all of these at the same time. We have to put our attention somewhere to begin with. And so here in this last paragraph, Sri Aurobindo unites these different experiences around a single focal point of practice. And this is coming back to a deep truth which at first we had seen superficially, seen in its limitations, and then moved beyond it. We started with a concentration on oneself, on the divine presence within us, in order to be able to withdraw from all this. And now we come back to a concentration on the divine within us, but not with the aim of withdrawal. And herein lies the correction. And Sri Aurobindo writes, we must recognize that our primary aim in knowledge must be to realize our own supreme self more than that self in others, or as the Lord of nature, or as the all. We can realize the supreme self in others to begin with. We may, for example, concentrate on the divine in human beings, in trees, in animals, or in an idol, an object of worship, a focal point in nature, such as the sun, or the moon, or any of the representative powers, and through that perceive the divine, and even attain to a realization of completeness. Or we may concentrate on the divine as Lord of nature, and the whole of nature is seen in one whole, and the divine as her Lord, and still there is a turning outward. Or we may concentrate on the all, the entire universe, and conceive of the whole Brahman and all things that can be, including us, and concentrate on that. But he says there is something else, a deeper truth here. We need to realize our own supreme self more than these things, because for that is the pressing need of the individual to arrive at the highest truth of his own being, to set right its disorders, confusions, false identifications, to arrive at its right concentration and purity, and to know and mount to its source. So he says to arrive at the highest truth of his own being. This is the pressing need of the individual. And the deep truth here is this: we entered this play of exploration in an individualized consciousness. We are first and foremost an individual. And each individual, although essentially one with the same, is expressing a unique line of development, a unique way of recovering, rediscovering the divine in his completeness. And so therefore there is something distinctive and special to each one. And that aspect needs to be brought back to its proper role, even in this concentration on the Supreme. And so he says, it is through that individual concentration of who we truly are, what is our highest, that this is fulfilled. So realize our own supreme self more than that self in others, or as Lord of nature, or as the all. For that is the pressing need of the individual. And what's the difference if we don't do this? If we began with a pursuit of realizing the Supreme Self through others, through external symbols, through all of nature, or even through the all, it is possible to attain to that. And after attaining to that, this particular individual instrument may still not be taken up for its own liberation and purification. Because having attained to the divine in its highest, most complete all, this individual is just one wave, one little whirlpool in the massive ocean, it does not need any special concentration or attention. And so it is possible in such a consciousness to leave this individual consciousness as it is, or to deal with it only to the same extent that we deal with whatever action one does in life and on generally on all things. But this would not fulfill the reason why we took birth in the individuality. And the reason was to take up this material, to purify from within, to perfect from within, and to make it a vehicle for a divine manifestation. And this purpose would be missed out. And this is the reason why the pressing need of the individual has to be taken up. And this he describes in steps. To arrive at the highest truth of his own being, this would be the first step. And then from there, to set right its disorders, confusions, false identifications, three kinds of distortion. So disorder is when the different pieces are not functioning in harmony. So once we have arrived at, even if not highest truth of the being, some deeper truth of the being, all these different pieces which form our nature are brought gradually in right relation to each other. The disorder is harmonized. Second, confusions. Confusions are where two different things are overlapping in their function. The function of one is mixing with another, and there is a wrong use of one part or insufficient use of another. And so the confusions are separated. So first is rearrangement to bring in harmony, and then the separation of mixtures. And third is false identifications. In the midst of all these, any of these parts could become more representative of us, and we have to bring the center of action back to the deeper truth, eventually the highest truth. And from there, to arrive at its right concentration. Now you have an individuality, the right concentration of the individuality, purity, and to know and mount to its source. So having put all these things in order, bring all the threads of awareness into one center, purifying the whole nature. This one center must turn to its source, know it, and eventually mount to it. So this sets the whole program of the individual consciousness, its purification and its transformation. If we don't do this, then there is no compulsion in our higher awakening to work on such a personal transformation, and therefore the evolutionary purpose is unfulfilled. But if we do this, aren't we bringing back our focus only to ourselves? Isn't there once again the possibility of an error that we become again the center, and all the other possibilities of recognizing the divinity in all, recognizing the divine as Lord of nature and the all, don't they somehow become secondary? And so this is the question Sri Aurobindo addresses. But we do this not in order to disappear into its source, but so that our whole existence and all the members of this inner kingdom may find their right basis, may live in our highest self, live for our highest self only, and obey no other law than that which proceeds from our highest self and is given to our purified being without any falsification in the transmitting mentality. So the correction here is why we are doing this. If the goal of this mounting to the source is to disappear into the source, then of course the objective is missed. Instead here, the goal is to set right the basis on which the whole of our individuality has been created. So he describes this in steps again. but so that our whole existence and all the members of this inner kingdom may find their right basis. What is the right basis for our mind, for our emotions, for our body, for our personal will, for our sensations, for our relationships with things in the universe? What is it that makes this individual part of the mind fulfill itself most truly? It's not enough to say the soul within us. It's not enough to say that the divine presence is inside, and if it is attuned to the divine presence, everything will be well. It has to go all the way to the deepest and highest station of that consciousness, and in relation to that find its purpose, find its fulfillment in all the parts. And so there is a phrase he is using. All the members of this inner kingdom may find their right basis. And this word inner kingdom reminds us that within us there is such a huge, huge range of layers, domains, powers of consciousness, as big as, or perhaps even bigger than, all that exists in the universe. There are even experiences in which one finds the inner universe is more rich, more diverse, larger even than the external universe. Because what we see in the external universe is a symbolic and condensed representation of possibilities which are still in the domain of consciousness, which are all within us when we go deep enough. And so when a reference point, and especially when the highest reference point is felt and brought forward, then this whole inner kingdom begins to be reorganized. All the values of everything begins to be changed. And it's like rearranging the entire universe. Sri Aurobindo uses this phrase elsewhere when he describes the awakening of the psychic being. When the psychic being awakens and comes forward and takes charge of our nature, he says, it is the true center and lord of the inner being. And it is that which begins to rearrange, bring back, put in right reference all the things within us in the inner domains. And this tends to happen almost spontaneously when the psychic influence comes forward strongly. But such a thing will be done also by the emergence of the power of the self and of the highest station of the self. So things then find their right basis, then next step, may live in our highest self, and then live for our highest self only. And this is the whole process of transformation. A part of our conscious being, now brought in right reference, on the right basis, knows its true sense of purpose in fulfilling, in manifesting the divine, now begins to live in that consciousness. First it knows this is what it has to do to manifest the divine. But now it begins to feel that presence more and more, first in relationship, and then it begins to live in that presence. At that point still, there is in the part of our being a tendency, an instinct of its past habit. Eventually that also dissolves, and this part begins to live for the highest self. And while it's living for the highest self, past tendencies and habits and instincts begin to fade, but they're still there. And eventually there comes a point where we can say all these parts of our being live for our highest self only and obey no other law than that which proceeds from our highest self. So that's the point where we can say this part now is completely an instrument for the divine consciousness. It has been sufficiently purified of all mixtures of other influences, including its past inheritance from evolution. Such a process has to be accomplished in all the parts of our being, all the parts of our nature. In our mind, in our life energies, in our willings and instincts, in the body consciousness itself, in all the functions of the different parts of our consciousness. In all these, it will have to go through this three-step process. Finally, obeying no other law than that which proceeds from our highest self. Even then, the transformation is not complete. From that point on, we can say, here is an instrument which is completely given to the divine. But the instrument's capacities are not yet maximized. And so there is this other work to be done to now fulfill the potential in the instrument also. But at this point, Sri Aurobindo highlights one factor and is given, after it, everything proceeds from our highest self and is given to our purified being without any falsification in the transmitting mentality. So there is still a transmitting layer of consciousness, because that which comes from our highest self must pass through gradations and degrees of consciousness. And by the time it reaches even the parts of our mind, parts of the emotions, life energies, and body, it can lose something, it can undergo some kind of a dilution or even distortion. So none of that should be there also, without any falsification in the transmitting mentality. The mentality here is not just the rational mind, but the higher ranges of the mind also are included. So just to reread this, you see how much is captured in a single sentence. To arrive at the highest truth of his own being, to set right its disorders, confusions, false identifications, to arrive at its right concentration and purity, and to know and mount to its source. But we do this not in order to disappear into its source, but so that our whole existence and all the members of this inner kingdom may find their right basis, may live in our highest self, live for our highest self only, and obey no other law than that which proceeds from our highest self, and is given to our purified being without any falsification in the transmitting mentality. The whole program is summarized. And so what's the result of this? And if we do this rightly, we shall discover that in finding the Supreme Self, we have found the one Self in all, the one Lord of our nature and of all nature, the all of ourselves, who is the all of the universe. And so starting with this concentration on the individual realization, one completes the realization in the collective consciousness and in nature and in the all. And there is a rationale why. It's not enough to say that this will happen. He has to say why. He says, for this that we see in ourselves, we must necessarily see everywhere, since that is the truth of his unity. Since we have already discussed this, all this is part of the divine's unity, and any knowledge which divides is an inferior knowledge. Therefore, anything which we realize within us naturally will begin to be perceived and realized in all the rest. That process of how it transitions from an individual to the whole realization, he discusses next. But just before we proceed, notice the stages he describes on how it moves from the individual finding of the Supreme Self, how we move to finding the Self in all. So he describes 3 degrees of it. First, we shall discover that in finding this Supreme Self, we have found the one Self in all. So this is the first step. When we experience the one Self in us, we begin to see that in others. This is a deep truth which can be experienced even as we are today, and in degrees from here all the way to the finding of the self. For example, when we become more conscious of our own emotions, we become more conscious of those same tendencies and emotions in others. When we become more conscious of the complexities of our own thoughts and their skill in self-deception, we begin to see those same tendencies in others more clearly and more deeply. And if this is true for something so superficial in our nature, it must be true equally for the deepest experiences and realizations in us. And so when we begin to enter in more and more direct relation with the psychic presence within us, we are able to perceive the psychic presence in things around us, beginning with those forms in which it is most directly expressed, such as in flowers, such as in certain special movements seen and felt in human beings, or even perception of or glimpses of the psychic presence in other people. These things become more easy, even spontaneous, when the same has been established in us as a constant and living experience. Eventually, though, he says, when we have found the Supreme Self in us, then we have found the One Self in all. And this is the inevitable truth because of the underlying unity. But that's the first step. From there, another degree, the one Lord of our nature. So it's not enough to have found the self in us and then seeing the self in all. You then have to find the Lord of our nature. And this realization also takes place first within us. And then from there it extends out there to the one Lord of all nature. So you see, there are two parallel movements: self within going to self around, nature within us extending to nature around us. Realization of the self and realization of Lord of nature are two very different experiences, although related. And unless one has realized the one self in its essence, realizing it as Lord of nature is not possible in its completeness, because the Lord of nature is free of nature, is master of nature, and is oneself in its essence. And so this precedes that. Individual precedes universal. So you see the importance of the realization of the self, the highest self. From there, two different directions are possible. One is the realization of the self in all, the other is the realization of the self as Lord of nature, and from there, Lord of all nature. These two directions could happen parallelly. One could happen before the other. But generally, the sequence which he is listing here is the sequence in which the whole thing unfolds. First, you have the experience of the self within, which makes you more and more spontaneously and directly know the self in all. And then the realization of the one Lord of our nature, and from there of all nature. And then finally, one more step, the all of ourselves, who is the all of the universe. So the individual now widens into the experience of the all, but the entry point is still through the individual, and so there is the sense of all of us, which eventually completes itself in the all of the universe. And the us itself becomes only a term in the whole, the all of the universe. And so we may even say there are 6 steps in this whole thing, if we make these distinctions. In practice, of course, things happen simultaneously, and many of these experiences tend to merge into each other. For this that we see in ourselves, we must necessarily see everywhere, since that is the truth of his unity. By discovering and using rightly the truth of our being, the barrier between our individuality and the universe will necessarily be forced open and cast away. And the truth that we realize in our own being cannot fail to realize itself to us in the universality which will then be ourself. So this transition from the individual to the universal is now described again in a summary form. Later in other chapters he will go in minute detail of the stages, degrees, variations of these experiences. So when we discover this truth of our being and use it rightly, the suggestion is that there can be a wrong use. We can discover this truth of our being and use it to withdraw and extinguish ourselves. But the right use would be then to realize and to manifest. Then, the barrier between our individuality and the universe will necessarily be forced open and cast away. So the transition does not necessarily happen automatically. If we perhaps allow it to happen, it may over time. But we could just as well choose to remain closed in a limited, a partial experience. But the force of the experience itself, as it deepens and becomes more complete, will begin to push to break these barriers. So the barrier will be broken. It will be forced open first. So there is a force, a pressure of the experience which begins to break this barrier and eventually cast away. That's when it becomes permanently gone. But in the transition, there may be long periods where there are states in which one experiences the universality and then one returns to the individual consciousness. And this is the reason why you will find in many lives of saints, there are contrary periods of expression of their divinity or their realization. There are times when they seem to be completely in the height of their divine realization and in their universality, and then they may come back in a kind of a normal state, though still different, though still special, but in which the egocentric tendencies may still appear to be quite strong. And the individuality may still override, individual interests may still override what would otherwise be a different way of expressing. And it takes a while, sometimes even years, before this process of forcing open the barrier and then eventually casting away the barrier between our individuality and the universe, before that can be completed. So, and as a result of this forcing open and casting away of the barrier, the truth that we realize in our own being cannot fail to realize itself to us in the universality. The suggestion when he uses this phrasing, cannot fail, means eventually it has to happen. But the suggestion is the process may take a long time also. And the difference will be, do we seek it or do we choose not to bother with it? And one could equally choose to say, all right, it's there, I have glimpsed it, doesn't matter. And one may choose to remain like that. Or if we are pursuing the integral yoga, we would consciously make an effort to extend it. I may draw on the analogy from the life of Ramana Maharshi. When he attained to self-realization, he said it took him 3 days. But after that he could have said, well, I have attained to self-realization, I can go back into it when I wish, I can even stay in it in certain specialized states, and the rest of the life doesn't matter. But he says he made the effort consciously to extend that state of self-realization in all the activities of life, and all meaning without exception, not just while he was preparing food, not just when he was meeting people, not only when he was conversing, but even in sleep state, in the most unconscious states including, in all states, the state of self-realization had to be maintained and stabilized, and that took him 10 years, he says. So if that is the kind of effort it may take to bring it to that state of, we may call, perfection of self-realization, then anything going further beyond may also take longer. Of course, you will see subsequently Sri Aurobindo describes how, because of the nature of the integral yoga, the whole thing is done simultaneously, parallelly, and because of the multifaceted nature of the effort itself, the whole thing can be done much faster. But the point here being, there is still a process before that universalization can become complete. And so he says, cannot fail to realize itself to us in the universality, which will then be our self. Then at that point we will actually experience the whole universe as ourself, completely. And here he links it to the particular formulations of the Vedantic tradition, realizing in ourselves the I am He of the Vedanta. We cannot but realize in looking upon all around us the identical knowledge on its other side, thou art that. So there are two formulations, two great formulations, in fact a third also which he does not mention here. I am He, soham asmi. But when I realize that I am He, and the experience widens out, we begin to see that this is true of all things. And then comes the second expression, the second articulation, which is tat tvamasi, thou art that thou art, tat tvamasi, that thou art. And eventually this completes in sarvam khalu idam brahman, all this verily is the one Brahman. But Sri Aurobindo's wording here is again very suggestive. Realizing in ourselves the I am He of the Vedanta, we cannot but realize in looking upon all around us the identical knowledge on its other side. So this other side is suggestive that there is a barrier still separating, and on the other side of the barrier the identical knowledge is there. It's not my knowledge, but it is still the knowledge, the reality. And one begins then to see it, we cannot but realize inevitably. If one does not, then one will say the realization we have is incomplete. It is the completion of the realization which leads in that direction. The question then remains, last question. We have only to see how practically the discipline must be conducted in order that we may arrive successfully at this great unification. So at this point, Sri Aurobindo has discussed all these corrections in the realization to bring to completeness of the totality. And now what's the discipline which will bring us to this most rapidly, most completely? This is now the theme of the next 5 or 6 chapters. I have read out the titles before, and we can reread, and you see the continuity of the thought, and all that we have discussed now put in summary so far is elaborated. So first step is release from the subjection to the body, the consciousness standing back, not body. All the nuances, complexities, degrees, gradations. It's not enough to say I am not body. There are instinctive tendencies in the body, the drive of life force in the body, the imprint of the mind consciousness inside the body, and all of these need to be dealt with their complexities. Rather than dealing with this, slipping on another part, trying again and shifting across many different efforts, he shows how the whole thing can be captured in one synthetic effort. Then from there, release from the heart and the mind. After that, release from the ego. From there, the realization of the cosmic self, the modes of the self, where we recognize the different aspects, facets, degrees of the self. the realization of the Satchidananda, the difficulties of the mental being, the passive and active Brahman, the cosmic consciousness, oneness. Then the soul and nature, the soul and its liberation, the planes of our existence, the lower triple Purusha, the ladder of self-transcendence. Now all of this, you see, gives you a picture of the further journey, which so far has just been put in summary form. Already though in a practical enough form that one can begin to orient our life in that direction. And we begin now the next chapter, the release from the subjection to the body. About 7 pages in all. Briefly, he recapitulates, puts into context this chapter. Our first step in this path of knowledge, having once determined in our intellect that what seems is not the truth, that the self is not the body or life or mind, since these are only its forms, must be to set right our mind in its practical relation with the life and the body, so that it may arrive at its own right relation with the self. So this is the first step we have to do. The moment we have realized that we are not all these things, in our intellect we have understood this. So set right in our mind the practical relation with the life and the body, so that it may arrive at its own right relation with the self. This is the immediate focus. We have understood this, we are convinced in our mind, and now how do we reorient? The moment you have shifted your paradigm, it takes a while to rearrange the relationships with things, because we have habits going back decades, even going back lives, which tend to pull us back into the old mode. And if we are not careful, although a part of us is in a new relationship, other parts are still in the old relation and there are conflicts. So here what he does is to set right fully the relationship with the body and life, in order that we enter right relation with the self. That is still the primary objective. This it is easiest to do by a device with which we are already familiar, since it played a great part in our view of the yoga of works. It is to create a separation between the Prakriti and the Purusha. Remember, Prakriti is everything which has to do with movement. Prakriti, the name itself tells you, Kriti, doing, doing with awareness, intention, doing with awareness or intention or drive of instinct, that there is something which forcibly is in movement. So everything that is in movement is Prakriti, including the mind's working, the emotions, energies, body instincts, even the substance of our body, because it is made of movement, is all part of Prakriti. So what is not Prakriti? The part which is static, the consciousness which observes. Now within our own mind we can make that distinction easily. When we observe our thoughts, there are two things. There are the thoughts, and then there is this thing which is observing the thoughts. If you observe the thing which is observing, you notice that itself does not move. It observes. Itself does not change. Thoughts change. This observes. But after a while, you can observe that the observing consciousness can exercise a freedom. It can choose to watch these thoughts or those thoughts, or it can choose to ignore the thoughts. It can exercise a choice. But when it exercises a choice, itself does not change. What changes only is the focus of its attention. When it turns attention away, it has not changed. It is still the same awareness. It has only reoriented its interest. And so this observing part of the consciousness, which is unchanging, is Purusha. But the same experience one can have even in our life energies, even in the body consciousness, though with much more difficulty. At first, though, with Purusha we will mean this observing consciousness that we are aware of. The Purusha, the soul that knows and commands, has got himself involved in the workings of his executive conscious force, so that he mistakes this physical working of it, which we call the body, for himself. He forgets his own nature as the soul that knows and commands. He believes his mind and soul to be subject to the law and working of the body. He forgets that he is so much else besides that. He is so much else besides that is greater than the physical form. He forgets that the mind is really greater than matter and ought not to submit to its obscurations, reactions, habit of inertia, habit of incapacity. He forgets that he is more even than the mind, a power which can raise the mental being above itself, that he is the master, the transcendent. And it is not fit the master should be enslaved to its own workings, the transcendent imprisoned in a form which exists only as a trifle in its own being. All this forgetfulness has to be cured by the Purusha remembering his own true nature, and first by his remembering that the body is only a working and only one working of Prakriti. You see, it's a very long sentence. Many repetitions, he forgets, he forgets, he forgets, he forgets. Now each of these he forgets is a step of our freedom. And all this forgetfulness is cured. We can of course do it separately, one by one, or by a single movement of remembering one thing. His own true nature. You remember your true nature and you know that these are all false identifications. And first remembering that body is only working. So a practical first step is taken towards remembering the true nature, and then degrees of separation of freedom by which the Purusha gets back to its lordship. But why is it that it has got stuck through all these layers of entanglement? That's what he has first described. The Purusha, the soul that knows and commands, has got himself involved in the workings of his executive conscious force, so that he mistakes this physical working of it, which he calls the body, for himself. And here is the key, the crux of the problem. The soul that knows and commands. So these are the two characteristics of the Purusha consciousness. It is observing, but the nature of its observation is awareness, which is knowledge, but which is also power of knowledge. So I observe my thoughts, I am not involved in them. I see the thoughts wandering, I am aware of all the details. And so it is in the awareness, first you see this knowing. I know all the thoughts, I know all the things happening in my mind. And then in the very act of knowing, I am able to exercise a choice. Remember, you can turn your attention away from something. You can refuse to involve yourself with that thought. And then interestingly, you find when you turn your attention away from the thoughts lose energy. They begin to weaken automatically. Where you put your attention begins to strengthen. You put your attention on the silence behind the thoughts, and the thoughts begin to subside. Not only that you can turn your attention to something else and therefore lose what is not interesting for you, but from that station you can also will to amplify what is interesting for you and will to refuse what is not interesting. So there is, for example, a tendency for a thought to come, a persistent thought. You can say, I refuse this thought. Turning attention away from it and also rejecting, this consciousness can command, exercise its power through knowledge. It cannot command until first it has gained knowledge by awareness. It's only when it has awareness that it can exercise its authority and command. But these are the two things in this sequence that characterize Purusha: knowing and commanding. So, the Purusha, the soul that knows and commands, has got himself involved in the workings of his executive conscious force, so that he mistakes this physical working, which we call body, for himself. So where is this error happening? There is an executive conscious force working. So at first we realize the executive conscious force as a mechanical conscious force. My body, I observe it, it feels hungry. The heart is beating. My thoughts, my mind has a wandering tendency. My mind is attracted to these ideas, it is repelled by those ideas. I'm aware of these things. What determined it? I don't know. It's all there. And I say that is the imprint, the habit of nature, Prakriti. But you notice this executive force is doing its thing. But when I observe especially something which interests me positively, the attention turns more to that, and then it gets as if sucked into that. When I think of these thoughts, I notice these sensations, and these sensations are interesting, and I begin to enter those sensations. I begin to enter those thoughts. I begin to put them on around me like a clothing, entering them until I'm fully wrapped in them, at which point I forget that I am actually outside them, free of them. Having entered them, I get sucked as if into a whirlpool which pulls me into it, traps me, so to say. And at that point, I mistake this for myself. I am these interesting thoughts. I am these sensations of the body. So for example, the most delicious food, your favorite, most delicious food is placed before you. The smells hit the nose. They create all these memories, instincts, pulls. The digestive juices are released in your stomach, and the stomach begins to growl. Your mouth begins to salivate, and your mind begins to pull in that direction of all the memories, of all the enjoyment of the food. And already something inside you is beginning to crave, and the experience is so pleasant. I identify with the pleasure of the experience, and as I move into it, the whole experience overwhelms me. I look at the food and I say, and I enjoy the feeling of the and I enter into it more and more, and I take a little bit. Before I've eaten, there is a huge anticipation now of how wonderful it's going to be, and in the enjoyment of that, I'm already immersed. When actually it enters my mouth, I might say, yuck, it's bitter, it's spoilt. It could happen. Or I might say, oh, it's delicious. Whichever way it goes, I have identified with the experience and with the experiencing movement of Prakriti, of nature, of the consciousness. I am the enjoyer of this food. I am the food and its enjoyment in me, and I forget that I am free. You may say at first that I willingly enter. If I was free, I could willingly enter, enjoy and withdraw. Or I may willingly enter while still keeping one foot outside and know my freedom. I can stop at any moment because I am actually free. More of me is outside and only a little finger enters inside. But the reality today is that through whatever habit, since childhood, since birth, we are fully in it. We don't have access to our station of freedom. If at all we have a glimpse of it, it is when there is a strong reaction, a strong shock in the experience which throws you back. The food is too hot, it burns your tongue, and in the shock of that, you disconnect from the experience and step back, withhold your craving, and say, I have to wait. At that moment, you have stepped back into a status of freedom, some degree of freedom, not even the full degree. And that's why the whole of the previous chapter was about finding your true station in the true and highest self. But right now, somewhere in between, as we are wandering, we oscillate between status of identification and self-loss and some partial degree of freedom, and we keep moving in between. He mistakes this physical working of it, which we call the body, for himself. I am the body. I got burnt. My body is burning because of too much chili in the food. My lips are burning. I wave my hands, my fingers in agony. But notice at that point, you could choose just to step back from all the sensations. Stop making noise, stop making this gesture and drama. Put your hand down. Stop this rapid breathing. Take a deep breath, step back, separate from the body. And the body is burning, I am not. You can quickly separate from the body identification. The body is craving the food, I am not. The body is in pain, I am not. The body is in pleasure, I am not. And you step back. And there already you have awareness of what's happening, but with awareness comes also the commanding, the authority, which would be eventually a mastery, where we can choose to play with all these things without being their toy. But right now we can only get to some partial degree of separation only. So the Purusha, the soul that knows and commands, has got himself involved in the workings of his executive conscious force, so that he mistakes this physical working of it, which we call the body, for himself. But who is it that's doing all this, creating all this and experiencing all this? And your own executive force, which you forgot is your executive force. But that is the truth in the highest. Right now I only see the part of the executive force which I know as my body, with which I am identified. So in the separation there will be so many degrees, all the way to recovering the station from which I know the full world energy as my creative energy, and this body as one of its tiny formulations. So there will be so many degrees, and that's why he has so many, he forgets. And each of them takes you back one step, all the way to the transcendent, which here we experience, the transcendent imprisoned in a form which exists only as a trifle in its own being. So now we go through all the gradations of forgetfulness. He forgets his own nature as the soul that knows and commands. He believes his mind and soul to be subject to the law and working of the body. So we don't know that we are actually in charge. We feel our whole life is compelled by circumstances. We don't realize within ourselves are compulsions of our habits. So our first instinct to be free takes a partial and distorted form. I want to be free of all the pressures around me which force me to do what I don't want to do. So first, as a child, it is, I want to be free of my parents' pressures. Maybe later as an adult to say, I want to be free of these restrictive laws of our nation or of the world or society. I want to rebel against society, whatever form it may take. But notice the first tendency to recover freedom is a tendency to indulge in your own habits, your own likes and dislikes. And you accept to be slave of your desires, of your impulses, and of your habits. I am free to eat what I like, to do what I like, to not do what I don't like. In other words, I have locked myself into the bundle of my individual nature habits. And we don't realize that that is a still greater form of slavery. In fact, from the larger perspective, Sri Aurobindo shows how all of these laws which we have created in society are intended precisely to help us get free of our own self-limitations. Little children are taught to say thank you, to not rush to open a gift but to wait and to politely and slowly open. You are taught to postpone gratification. You feel the craving, you say wait. I get upset, It's not right that I slap you just because I'm upset. I must learn to restrain my anger and my upset, and so on. All of these rules which we create are intended to bring some degree of order in what would otherwise be a very chaotic and barbaric society if all of us followed our lowest impulses. So the laws serve their purpose, and in abandoning them, there is also a greater truth. At first, we rebel against them because they hold us back from our lower instincts, but once we have risen above our lower instincts, we find these same laws restrictive. And we need to find a higher freedom, a greater spontaneity, which these laws are stifling. So there's a transition upwards where we break the laws and rise to a greater status of a higher freedom. The error in breaking the laws is, of course, falling back to the old habits, the lesser, inferior modes of our nature. But the breaking serves a purpose when we have to rise above. He believes in forgetting his nature as his own nature as the soul that knows and commands. He believes his mind and soul to be subject to the law and working of the body. So I find myself now trapped in my material circumstances, but much more by my own physical nature and its limitations and habits. I want to be happy. I want to be nice. I want to overcome my problems. I want to be able to overcome my limitations and so on. But this body restricts me. Even to the extent that we feel we are one with body. So this is the first layer. Then he forgets that he is so much else besides that is greater than the physical form. So first he is turning away from the body identification. I am beyond my body, heart and mind. So you have great statements coming from freedom fighters. They will say things like, you can jail this body, but you cannot jail my mind. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me because I am not body. I am so much more. And from my station of freedom in my mind, which you cannot imprison, I will continue to think what I want. I will continue to work for the freedom of society, the revolution, etc. But it stops here. We do not see there is much more beyond. When Sri Aurobindo was first put in jail, he struggled with all this invasion of thoughts in his mind. Until he said, I even felt as if I might go mad. And it was at that point that there was an intervention from above, a great peace descended. And with that, the beginning of the higher spiritual experiences. And he complained to the Lord. He said, why is it you've put me in jail when I was working for the freedom of the country? There's so much work to be done. And then Sri Krishna reminds him, he says, remember a month ago I had told you have to withdraw from your work. And at that point you could not, because you felt that the work could not go on without you. And so I have broken your attachment to the work and brought you into the jail for something greater. And the higher possibilities began to be developed. But in a condition of an isolation from material circumstances and material distractions, which was as if needed for that concentrated awakening. But until that happens, we rarely make effort to go beyond our mind's freedom to the higher spirit's freedom. So much more. He forgets that he is so much else besides that is greater than the physical form. He forgets that the mind is really greater than matter and ought not to submit to its obscurations, reactions, habit of inertia, habit of incapacity. So first step, the mind separating and recovering its greater freedom. So what is it that the mind has to get back greater than matter? Obscurations of matter. So notice in our mind there is a dulling when we are identified with the body. After eating food, we start getting sleepy. Even if somehow we don't get sleepy, the functioning of the mind becomes a little dull. If we are tired, let's say we have not slept enough, again the same thing. The mind is dull, it's heavy, it's not able to function freely. Because we have accepted that we are one with the body, we don't struggle against this inferior truth. The higher truth is that the mind can be free at any point, independent of the body's condition. But for that, you have to separate the mind from the body consciousness. And you can try this as an experiment when you have just had your food, maybe not this evening, because it's good to be sleepy after food because you want to sleep at night. But after lunch, perhaps, if you have had a heavy lunch and you get a little drowsy or you find your mind dulled, you can make this effort to consciously will your mental awareness to separate from the body awareness and turn into pure mind awareness. And you'll find at that point it becomes completely free. The dullness and sleepiness of the mind is gone. The body may feel dull and sleepy, but the mind itself can be bright and fresh. And when you're able to do this a few times consciously, you'll find the skill is picked up very quickly. At any point, under any situation, you're required to think fresh. You can just separate your mind like that from the body and it becomes clear. Sri Aurobindo suggests the exercise of shifting the center of awareness to the top of the head, which gets the mind awareness free from identification with the brain. And he says after that you never again have brain fatigue when you think from above the head. So you might even try this to shift your center of attention as you pull your mind separate from the body. It's not too difficult. It takes a few minutes in the beginning, but later it can happen very quickly. So the first thing he's describing is the mind's obscurations because of identification with the body. Second is reactions. And you notice when somebody hurts you, first reaction of irritation, of anger. Somebody says something or somebody hurts you physically, either way, there's a first rushing to reaction. The reaction itself belongs in the domain of the body consciousness to protect itself instinctively, and it's a large part of the life force in the body which has this reactive tendency. The mind in thought also follows in the reaction. We can separate from the body consciousness and the mind can watch dispassionately. Somebody says something abusive and the mind turns and says, what is it that makes this person speak like that? What's happening inside him? What's bothering him? It is not in a reactive mode. It just begins to explore and try to understand. And it doesn't need any special effort to be compassionate. You notice, the poor fellow, he's in pain. What can I do to help him? There's no reactivity, rather there is free action. Third, habit of inertia. The habit of inertia in the mind identifying with the body takes the form of going back to old habits, old senses of security, old thought forms, old fixed ideas of what's safe, what's not, what you should do or not do. Especially when in life you're forced to make a great leap, a great transition, do something you've never done before, you're faced with this. As long as you're moving in the regular groove of daily life, you're never challenged to break out of the habit of inertia. And with body's inertia comes mind inertia. The mind is never challenged to break free from its borders. Yes, you can read a few unusual stories, read science fiction, read some new facts which broaden your mind's perspective, but your way of thinking is still embedded in the old way of being and thinking. That is broken only when you're challenged to do something you've never done before. Especially when you're challenged to do something precisely which you fear or which you're incapable of. Let's say you're doing what is called bungee jumping. You have to leap from a great height with nothing to protect you except this elastic cord tied to your legs. It takes great courage to do that. But you'll notice the courage is not a biological courage, it's a mental courage much more. It's only when the mind is fully convinced that the conviction can transfer into the body, and then you can take the leap. And it is such a release, such a freedom, and that's what gives you the great high. Suddenly your consciousness is liberated from some narrow block. And that's the reason why people feel like doing it again and again. And there's an exhilaration, of course, of the life force. But the first step is a release. Something like that one can bring in many ways. A simple exercise you could do. Look back at somebody to whom you have said something which was wrong, for example, and make a conscious effort to go and apologize sincerely, explaining why what you did was wrong and in what way you will make sure it will not happen again. Just that exercise of going and apologizing to somebody, overcoming your own resistance to an error that you can recognize, it helps you to break certain barriers. But these are just the beginning. The real liberation of the mind takes place when the habit of the substance in the mind to be in a repetitive grooves, elastically returning to its old way of looking at it, safe, protective, that goes. And that comes when the mind separates from the body consciousness and its habit of inertia. And then comes habit of incapacity. Because the body cannot do more than a certain amount, the mind also has been held back. In fact, the mind can do anything, everything that it can conceive of. It has no limits to its capacity. And so we have to push those limits also. All of this is largely the character of our education in what we call higher education. In the lower early part of education, body, emotions, life energies are much more highlighted. But in what is called higher education, it is mind which is freed. And at that point you notice very little attention is given to the body and the body's activities. But we are never really taught how to free the mind consciousness completely. It is only by activities which are compelled on us that somehow we end up freeing up parts of the mind to the extent that those activities are exercised. But if the yogic methods are brought into education, we can teach young people to free the mind consciously. And then in the freed mind consciousness, anything is possible, including what we currently describe as psychic abilities. The mind can sense things, see things at a distance, perceive things which are beyond the current reach of the sense mind, conceive of realities which are way beyond what we could conceive of with the sense mind in the physical domain, and so on. All of those possibilities become easy. So he forgets the mind is really greater than matter and ought not to submit to its obscurations, reactions, habit of inertia, habit of incapacity. And the mind says, I can't do this. It's a habit of incapacity. He forgets that he is more even than the mind. And now we're moving further. A power which can raise the mental being above itself. He doesn't elaborate here, but just this idea that you can go even above your mental consciousness and thinking is to us not accessible. Now, right now, for example, even for those of us who have been in some kind of training, we have an idea that yes, it is possible, but how do I do it? And the reason I cannot do it because I don't have conscious memory of those levels above the mind. If the memory was vivid, I could just hold the memory and return to that state. This is what happens often when we have had a deep meditation or some special descent of consciousness. We feel elevated in a different state of consciousness. Afterwards, as we fall back, the memory is still fresh, and by conscious effort we are able to touch those states. But after a while you only remember that it felt nice, but what it felt like has faded, and you are no more able to get back to that state. So that's why the word forgets is very important here. It's not just a remembering as an idea, it is a remembering in experience. He is more even than the mind, a power which can raise the mental being above itself. That he is the master, the transcendent, and it is not fit the master should be enslaved in his own workings. So he gives two pictures here, master and transcendent. So for the mastery, you are still an individual form that has a station of mastery, and the master should not be enslaved to his own workings, and I find myself bound in this body. But the other experience is the transcendent, where there is no individuality or form of or center. So the transcendent, imprisoned, should not be imprisoned in a form which exists only as a trifle in its own being. So in the transcendence, even the form has no relevance. It's a trifling. So that to that extent we should be able to recover our freedom. All this forgetfulness has to be cured by the Purusha remembering his own true nature. And that's going to be the effort across a few chapters. But first by remembering that the body is only a working and only one working of Prakriti. So Prakriti is operating on all these levels, including higher levels of consciousness, all the way down to the material. And in that larger working, there are many workings. And out of that, one tiny working of Prakriti is the body in the larger material working. So now he is taking us into the active first step. We say then to the mind, this is a working of Prakriti that is neither myself, neither thyself nor myself. Stand back from it. Now we say to the mind, okay, this is a working of the Prakriti that is neither thyself nor myself. So it is not mind nor me. So we've already taken a stance that I am telling mind. Who is this person that's telling mind? So we're not going to discuss that yet. It's in fact a part of the mind which is separate from the larger working of the mind. But still, we are reorienting the mind at first. So part of us stands back, which is the freest part, the center of the thinking buddhi. Stand back from it. It's neither thyself nor myself. We shall find, if we try, that the mind has the power of detachment, has this power of detachment, and can stand back from the body, not only in idea, but in act, and as it were, physically, rather than vitally. Now here comes a very important distinction. When you say, I am standing back from the body, you can have the idea, I am not body. So I observe, I have body, I am not body, and then I am aware of this center which is watching and observing. But that still takes a position which is in the domain of idea, and then it has to separate further until it becomes an act. I am not body in awareness, in action, all these actions are not me. A further separation. And then he says, as it were, physically, or rather, vitally. So there is a separation in the physical consciousness and in the vital consciousness. I am separate. These are all gradations as we stand back, and the effort we make initially is whatever degree of separation we experience, we pull back more, separate more, and separate more. This detachment of the mind must be strengthened by a certain attitude of indifference to the things of the body. We must not care essentially about its sleep or its waking, its movement or its rest, its pain or its pleasure, its health or ill health, its vigor or its fatigue, its comfort or its discomfort, or what it eats or drinks. Now here's the tendency which is so common in the ascetic practice, the truth of which we may exercise with this intention, only to intensify the separation. by a certain attitude of indifference to the things of the body. It doesn't mean you don't care, but it's a general attitude that you're indifferent. So the effective form of it, which we see Sri Aurobindo practice in his own life, was he made it a principle never to complain and never to ask for anything. So if the food had too much salt, he would still take it. If it had too little salt, he would still take it, not complaining nor asking. Now it's not just that you don't complain externally, you don't complain internally also. It's not acceptable that inside you say, oh, this person again, there's too much salt, too little salt, too much chili, whatever form. None of that. The mind will be absolutely quiet, calm, detached, and say, all right, this has more salt, okay, this has less salt. If it's a big issue, that it is not good for your health, that there's too much sugar, you may choose not to take that, but because it is not good for your health, not because you have an aversion. So if the food is too bitter, that's fine. My body shall be trained to deal with it. My mind is not my body, and for my mind it does not matter. So the correction here is, this does not mean that we shall not keep the body in right order so far as we can. We have not to fall into violent asceticism or a positive neglect of the physical frame. But we have not either to be affected in mind by hunger or thirst or discomfort or ill health, or attach the importance which the physical and vital man attaches to the things of the body, or indeed any but a quite subordinate and purely instrumental importance. So we don't give the same importance which the physical and vital man would do. In a conversation which I had with Llewellyn Von Lee, a Sufi master, he was complaining how in a retreat that he has, sometimes 200 or 300 people at a time, everybody is sitting with a little bottle of water. Why? Because you've been taught you should keep your body hydrated, you should drink regularly so that you overcome the perspiration, etc. Keep the body hydrated. So he was criticizing it, even mildly ridiculing it, saying, oh, it's like little babies with their little bottle or little bib which they need for comfort, and you keep drinking every now and then. And he compared it to the training he had got to go through. None of those comforts. You drink water once, and then after that you go through your day, you do your thing, until you get your next opportunity or the right time for drinking water or eating food. In between, you should be able to manage. It's not such a big deal. And so he spoke of this to people. Of course, it's a message to the students that they should overcome that constant need to be obsessed with the body's discomforts and comforts. But if you see in the ascetic training, they would impose this. By imposing, it reaches a point where the symbol, the action itself becomes symbol of your mastery. I drink once in the morning, I don't drink the rest of the day, whatever the cost. Even if I am thirsty, it does not matter. And so I have attained to a great height. The act itself becomes symbolic, and there is the negligence and the violent asceticism, positive neglect of the physical frame, they follow. So we are not to do that. We have to keep in mind whatever is needed for the right order of the body. So certainly when there is very high temperature, heavy perspiration, you will make sure you drink. The body tells you it is thirsty. But if at that point you're in the middle of some activity and you have half an hour or an hour to finish, you can say, all right, I complete this work and then I will take. It's possible to stand back and not get too involved with this, keeping the right balance. Or with age, somebody beyond a certain age is much more fragile in fluctuations of the salt content in the blood and the blood thickening, or they have health problems. They have to be careful. So you keep that balance, but beyond that, you don't give importance to it. It has to be done, so you do it. We must not care essentially about all this. And you've seen a long list. All of these things are part of the body consciousness and its compulsions on the mind. Sleep, waking, movement or rest, pain, pleasure, health, ill health, vigor or fatigue, comfort, discomfort, eating, drinking. And we see, especially with the younger people in the ashram, that the mother tried to bring these values into their life from the beginning. Not to give too much importance to these things. And if the body is ill, she would say, don't worry, just continue your work. Even for the sadhaks, doesn't matter, you have a fever, unless it's really extreme, you do your work. Continue as if there's no problem. And in most cases, what you're doing is, first of all, freeing the part of the consciousness which would be obsessed with these things, but also the body is being taught a new rhythm. And the mind can imprint on the body a new rhythm and push it to certain limits. Beyond those limits, of course, we should be watchful. We don't push beyond, because then there is a breakdown. Not to be affected. The second part is not being affected in the mind. Okay, you have hunger, you have thirst. You recognize it, but you don't make an issue of it. You don't obsess over it. Discomfort or ill health. Nor must this instrumental importance be allowed to assume the proportions of a necessity. We must not, for instance, imagine that the purity of the mind depends on the things we eat or drink. Although during a certain stage, restrictions in eating and drinking are useful to our inner progress. Now you see here the obsessive importance given in many of the ascetic traditions to what you eat. It has to be sattvic food. Yes, of course it makes a difference. You have to eat before sunset. Yes, of course it makes a difference. You should avoid certain types of food because they interfere with certain kinds of concentration or freedom of the mind. You should not take food cooked by another person because the other person's vibes are getting into it, or meat or fish or whatever form it may take. Restrictions on these things. During a certain stage, restrictions in eating or drinking are useful to our inner progress. But beyond that point, to give it an obsessive importance is an error. So we give it an instrumental importance, and we don't assume the purity of the mind is dependent on these things. Yes, it is influenced, but it is not dependent. My health is influenced by the food I eat, but it is not dependent on the food I eat. If this idea can be imprinted into the body consciousness, then you will find the body can adjust very quickly to any kind of food. I was told this by one of the early children in the ashram, one of the first batch of 10 children. She said that when we first came, the food that was being given in the dining room, or even later for the students' kitchen, the corner house, had very low nutritional content by today's standards. But we were in absolutely good health. We used to run around and do all the activities through the whole day. We would get wet in the rain, we would be running in the full blazing sun and have no illness, no problems at all. And then later somebody said to the mother, oh, but this food is not nutritious enough. She said, we used to just drink a bowl of soup which had all kinds of things mixed in. And some nutritionist said, this is not good, this is not right, we have to have more of protein, more of carbohydrate, more of this and that. And the whole food structure was changed. But she said, after that, I found people having more illnesses than what we had before. Because the idea went in. I had also heard this story, which I could never confirm with anybody who was present there directly, that in the earliest period of the ashram, the dispensary was a very small affair. The number of medicines were very few, and primarily what was given was something called red medicine. So if you fell, you had an injury, they would apply red medicine. You had some illness, they would give you red medicine. It was the thing which was the fix-all. And later, somebody declared, oh, this is fake. This cannot cure everything. This can only cure those things. For those things, for those illnesses, you need other types of medicine. And when it was reported to the mother, she said, so from now on, start giving the regular medicine because the faith is broken. So this incident was narrated to us by somebody who had heard it from another sadhak. It's possible, it would be a great truth spiritually at least, that as long as one has that conviction and the faith in the nature of the medicine, it has a huge effect. And if the faith is complete, the effect can be complete. This is the principle of what is called the what effect is that? Placebo effect. In fact, when testing modern medicines, they have to make great efforts to discount for the placebo. Because just the fact that you're part of an experiment where you're told you're being given something which will have this effect, that itself produces an effect, even though what you're given is just sugar pills. And this is the nature of the faith. And to tap into that faith consciously would be the method of yoga. Then you can take a glass of water, bring into yourself that conviction and faith, invoke the spiritual force, light and force, and then drink it with that intention that it is going to have this effect in you, and it will have, because you've infused it with that consciousness which will have that effect. And your consciousness has accepted that this will have that effect, and the result is there. But this kind of thing is possible with food to a great extent. Unless in the biology the habit has formed and the belief in the biology that this is not sufficient, then you start getting all those other effects of the insufficiency. But the truth here is deep, that one can imprint in the body consciousness this freedom and teach it to adapt to any situation. And the thought that the mind's purity depends on the body consciousness, or the mind's health depends on the body, the food we eat, or the purity depends on the food we eat, that would be an error. And we see this in Sri Aurobindo's own practice, where whatever was given to him, he took. And he said he wanted to show that one can be a yogi even without abandoning all these things which were part of a lifestyle which he had grown up with. Not that he needed it. And when it was decided that he had to stop it, he stopped, including the smoking and even the non-vegetarian food. All those things were stopped. But he was not dependent, and the mind's purity was not dependent on those things. So key word is influenced but not dependent. Everything influences. Even the weather pattern will influence your digestion. But how big is the influence? How strong is your digestive power to overcome all those trivial influences, including the trivial influence of the thing which you have eaten itself? If the digestive power is strong, it can extract from it all the nutrition that it needs. We know, for example, in many cases, great athletes or gymnasts who came from a very poor background where they did not have enough food to eat, or healthy food in the conventional sense, were still skillful and strong and supple in their particular line of interest. When they entered it, they outperformed those who had been brought up with all the conventional training and food. Because there is a capacity which the body has. But the mind itself will not give too much importance to these things. And then he says, nor on the other hand must we continue to think that the dependence of the mind or even of the life on food and drink is anything more than a habit, a customary relation which nature has set up between these principles. So the relationship with the food is only a habit. And the habit is tied to your heredity, which is nothing but habit, going back a couple of 7 generations, as they say. So when modern nutritionists say, this food is good for you, that is not good, or this proportion is good for you, that is not good, it is based on studies which average so many types, or studies which belong only to certain types. If you look at the variety of human types and go across cultures and habits, you'll find each habit for that type is what it has got used to. And if you make an average of all that, it will mess up everybody's habit. So rather, the approach should be eat what your body is used to, and then it will find its way. But the yogic approach will be, even that we can overcome because it is a customary habit set up by nature. And whatever comes from that, my body should be able to get its nutrition and manage. As a matter of fact, the food we take can be reduced by contrary habit and new relation to a minimum without the mental or vital vigor being in any way reduced. Even on the contrary, with a judicious development, they can be trained to a greater potentiality of vigor by learning to rely on the secret fountains of mental and vital energy, with which they are connected more than upon the minor aid of physical elements. So there are 2 degrees further here. So the first degree is, we can train a contrary habit. So we had a certain habit and we reshape that habit. Let's look at the food given in the dining room. Yes, it is nutritious by whatever conventional standards, but it's not nutritious enough by the modern standards. When the mother formulated it, it was already more nutritious than what was normal for a poor region within India. Now it is below par in terms of what is possible elsewhere. But still, for those who are attuned to that food, it does not make any difference. They are able to manage just as well. But he says even you can create a new habit to reduce to a minimum without mental or physical vital vigor being in any way reduced. Where does the energy come from? Naturally, the mind can draw energy from the mental world, and the vital can draw energy from the vital domain, which he says they can be trained to a greater potentiality of vigor by learning to rely on the secret fountains of mental and vital energy, with which they are connected more than upon the minor aid of physical elements. In other words, the truth is the mind and vital need the physical food as their source of energy only by a limited habit. Behind that habit is a deeper truth that they access energy from those other domains more easily. You observe in little children, for example, they exercise themselves, they run around, they're fully active, hyperactive even, the parents are tired. Then the child lies down, goes to sleep. The sleep is so deep, so sound, that you can lift the child in your arms, go and place him or her elsewhere, and the child doesn't wake up. Try to do that with an adult and they will wake up immediately. So as an adult, we are not going deep enough as the child goes. But once out of that deep sleep, the child is completely fresh, completely regenerated, again ready to run around with all the freshness and energy. We wake up from an afternoon nap, we don't have the same level of energy. What is it that's different in the child? During that time of deep sleep, the mind and vital, because they're still not fully embedded, they're sufficiently free to absorb from the universal and refresh completely. We can train this. And the dependent on food is there, but he says it is a minor aid of physical elements. It is an aid, but it's a minor. This aspect of self-discipline is, however, more important in the yoga of self-perfection than here. For our present purpose, the important point is the renunciation by the mind of attachment to or dependence on the things of the body. Now that's our immediate focus, not to be attached to or dependent on the things of the body, but all this possibility which he has described belongs to the discipline of the yoga of self-perfection. Since we have read that portion already, we can link it to what we have read And you will recall in the Yoga of Self-Perfection, Sri Aurobindo discusses several facets in which this fits. First of all, it belongs to the domain of increasing the energy. Okay, we can look at all of them. First aspect of the Yoga of Self-Perfection is the equality. Remember, foundation being an equality. This whole attitude we have to food, to sleep, to health, to fatigue, pain and pleasure is to be dealt with by a poise of equality. So you see, already in the equality, this separation from the cravings of the body or life or mind and their habits is implied. Second aspect of the Yoga of Self-Perfection was the increase of the power and capacity of the Shakti in all the instruments. And in the physical consciousness similarly, and in the mental and vital consciousness, we would infuse into it a higher source of energy, which is not taking from below, but drawing from above. Eventually, the Divine Shakti herself, pouring an infinite energy into the mind, into the vitality, and even eventually in the body. Then, the third aspect was the perfecting by supramental gnosis. We won't touch that now. The next, fourth, is the physical body as the base. So the perfection of the body itself and the potential of the body being pushed to a physical siddhi, a physical perfection, physical attainment. And there, this particular aspect of the freeing up from food, minimizing need of food and drawing on energy, and making even the body more supple, less needy even of the type of food, more adaptable, etc., would be part of that perfection. So I think it would cover these three broadly. The others are too specific to other levels of consciousness. So you see, on three facets of the Yoga of Self-Perfection, this particular exercise would be applied. But right now it is a renunciation by the mind of attachment and dependence on things of the body. Thus disciplined, the mind will gradually learn to take up towards the body the true attitude of the Purusha. Within that, he describes the gradations of that true attitude, first supporting, and then it comes to be a perceiver, and then it comes to a position of mastery, etc., which we will take up afterwards, and beginning next time. But just at this point, we pause and review the big picture. We have set for ourselves a program of attaining to the highest realization of our self, which is coterminous with the self of all beings of the whole universe and master of nature. For this purpose, we are beginning the first step, which will be part of a larger practice, which will span all the way to the highest. And the first step is getting a foothold on a station of freedom, which is not bound in Prakriti, not bound in false identification with nature and in particular with the body. And in this first step, our station of poise is going to be in the mind. As a practice, it can take two forms. One, that in the beginning of the day, we sit quietly, stepping back in consciousness from the body, from emotions, perhaps even to some extent from thoughts, from our life, from all the circumstances of the world around us, and centering ourselves only in this pure observing consciousness, centered in mind perhaps, or turning to something above mind, but still poise being mostly in this region of the mind. We stay in this for as long as possible. And then, as we enter the day, we make effort to retain this state as far as possible into the activities. Where we lose it, we make effort to step back, remembering the morning's concentration. If possible, we use some important transition points to recover as far as possible the morning's concentration. So whenever we are changing work, we pause and make this effort. Gradually, it will lead to a situation where some part of you remains always observant while the rest of you is immersed and stepping back and forth. This would be one form of practice. The second form of practice will be emerging from this, or it can be begun parallelly. While in the midst of work, we don't do any special effort of separation. While in the midst of the work, we are always observing that a part of us is detached while another part is involved. I'm doing the work and I hold attention somewhere at the back of the head, back of the mind. The method is easy to do if you can catch one particular experience. And the experience is like this. Suppose at the end of the day, you have a very important meeting. Choose what is important for you. You're going to meet the mother, you're going to meet the president, you're going to meet your hero of whatever sports or cinema, something very important to you. And at the end of the day, you're going to meet this person. Throughout the day, whatever you're doing, somewhere at the back of your mind, there is this obsessive turn of your consciousness, something important at the end of the day. You're not fully conscious of it, but it is there pressing. Catch this experience. Make it the base. So you are involved in work, but at the back of your mind, in this part, you keep this awareness of the divine, the idea of the divine, of the self, of the mother, of the presence, even awareness of a peace or a wideness or a light. Whatever your immediate point of contact with the divine. Or simply this idea, this is free, I am free, I am not body. And then a part of you is in the activities, some part remains free. And you will notice, because this part is free, there is an automatic pulling back. Whenever there is a difficulty, I pause, I stand back, and I exercise a greater freedom. And this is done continuously throughout the day. It's not as separate, as extreme a separation as if you do it in a concentrated way in the morning. But it allows for consistency, a persistence through the day of some part that remains always aware, in awareness or in remembrance of the divine. A combination of both would be helping. Each will help the other and make it most effective. But we could put this into practice in the coming week. And what we will try to do as we study this text, we will try to put into practice whatever he describes, to whatever extent we are able to, and let him lead us deeper into the experience. So we can pause here and take up any questions, any comments, any experiences you want to share. Yes.
My name is Sunil and I'm from Bangalore. Guruji, have you experienced anything of what you have explained today? If so, up to what level of degree of experience?
I wouldn't feel compelled to share everything, but as an indication, what I can say is because these ideas we were exposed to these ideas regularly when I was a student in the school. Not in the school, but because of my listening to the discourses of my teacher, I had begun to put them into practice at that point, and I found that one could take it very far. With the body, for example, one could even teach the body to overcome practically any kind of symptom of discomfort. And it would be done by the mind refusing to participate and then willing upon the body a completely different response. And it could be even dealt with, it could even be used to deal with extreme forms of pain. You could overcome the pain or completely be ignore it, or from that same poise, what could impose on the body any kind of sensation or experience, including illness.
That is up to one level of ability.
Yes.
Anything above that have you experienced? Or
Yes, of course, of course. So one can go much more, and you can even have experiences of the mind standing back from the body, feeling itself as not having a body at all. As if the body is completely dissolved and you are just this pure mental consciousness with no physical location.
Isn't that supposed to be a permanent effect?
It need not stay, especially it doesn't stay in the beginning when you are in activity.
Some people it has stayed over a period of time.
But it takes time to reach to a point where you can hold it permanently. But even there, I would say what you have attained permanently is one layer of the experience. You can have further deeper layers. Because the goal is not to stop with the mental awareness. The goal is to take it all the way to self. So that you're living in self rather than in a mental awareness which is free of body. But what I'm describing is something more. You cannot hold this permanently when you're in physical activity. It is done most easily when your body is quiescent, that you can experience you don't have a body at all. But the moment the body moves and there are sensations from the body, you know you have a body.
Isn't this a permanent physical change? Every cell in the body
No,
undergoes a change.
no, no. This cannot be a physical change. This is only a change of your mind consciousness freeing from the body. The cellular working does not change by itself. It's only your mind consciousness which is more free.
But I have read people about UG Krishnamurti
Mhm.
and Sri Ramana also. It happens at the cellular level.
First of all, you do not know that it has happened at a cellular level. That's your assumption from their description.
Yeah, that's
They have not described anything of the cells. Neither Raman Maharshi nor UG Krishnamurti.
no, usually it has
Of cells,
UGK, yes, perfect.
he is describing experiences in the body consciousness, not in a cellular level. That's a different working.
Yeah, he has gone to the cellular level is what he has clearly mentioned.
Okay, possible. I have not read that.
It is about UG, it's not about Jidu.
Yeah, I know.
It's about UG Krishnamurti.
Yes, okay. So maybe he has experiences of things in the cells, but even this is not this experience. It would require something much deeper before you can imprint it at the level of body consciousness or cellular consciousness. So remember, there are many kinds of experiences.
Yeah, that's
This is one experience where currently we're focusing only on freeing the mind from the body consciousness. Later, the mind can imprint its freedom on the body consciousness and even work to reprogram, change the body consciousness, awaken the body consciousness, and so on. That is not in this immediate step which we have read, but it would be consequence of this step. If someone has worked for it, that could be attained. If they have not worked for it, it need not happen by itself. That's my point.
I heard that it can happen by itself too. This is no effort need to be put in at all.
And says somebody.
This is what
So-
from UG Krishnamurti.
So the question is this: he had to put no personal effort, but you cannot say that no effort was put into it by the instinct of his consciousness. You understand? Because it doesn't happen to everybody that coming into mental consciousness of freedom, that it will have an effect on the body.
Chase it for many lifetimes, but it just cannot happen.
Because you don't make the effort. But if you do make the effort, it will happen for sure. In some people, in the nature, there may be a tendency to automatically work in that direction. He may say, I didn't make an effort. In my consciousness, it happened. That's a different story. It could also be that there are past life experiences which awaken spontaneously and awaken those imprints. And so he may say, I made no effort. But you can't generalize that to everybody and say, it'll happen.
Generalizing it, but this, because each person is unique.
But you understand why it happens or it doesn't happen.
So consciously or unconsciously, an effort is doing this. I would like to meet you after this.
Surely. Anyone else? In this aspect of the body consciousness changing, we had read some months ago from Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga, where he made a note of how he had been able to bring in the body consciousness itself a change that he could walk barefoot on the hottest summer day on hot stone and not feel discomfort at all? Now, there are two things here. One is mind not reacting, which is the immediate focus here. The mind standing back and saying, this is not me, that is feeling the pain. But the other is imprinting into the body consciousness an ability to overcome that. And the foot can step on the hot stone and not feel any discomfort of burning sensation. That would be the mastery in the body consciousness, and that is what he has described there. But what we can practice as ourselves, among ourselves right now, is, especially now that we're in the hot season, to not have the mind react to the body's discomfort of heat. Or it's so hot, even the nose is burning as you breathe in the hot air. Or it's so sticky because of the humidity, or you're dripping in perspiration. Instead of being restless and agitated, or in mind being upset about it, the mind remains calm, detached, and says, this is not me, this is body. And it disengages from the body's discomfort sensation. And you'll find, if you focus on the mental consciousness itself, it is not uncomfortable. So I am mind who is not uncomfortable. Oh yes, if I turn my attention to the body, I can see the body is feeling uncomfortable, but I am not uncomfortable. So just making that separation would be a good practice which we can use in the coming days. Okay, so the physical consciousness and consciousness at the cellular level are of two very different grades. The physical consciousness is the body awareness which feels something. For example, you feel hungry. So the body feels the hunger as a pain, as a movement, muscles cramping, or some agitation there, or a heat of the chemicals being released for digestion. Your mind translates this as, I'm hungry. But the body sensation of hunger is different from the mind's interpretation of hunger. Okay? So that part which you feel in the body sensation of a hunger or a craving, that would be body consciousness. If you can separate it from mind's interpretation, then the body consciousness will tell you what you need to eat if you're ill. Mind interpretation is very large, sitting on top of this body hunger, and it says, I want ice cream because I'm feeling hot. But the body may say, the body feeling, because it does not impose itself. If you make your mind very quiet and try to feel, your body may say, what I need is, and there will be crave for a particular kind of food, which if you take, it will cure whatever imbalance or discomfort it has. And mind's greed, desire, habit is normally so big that we don't sense what the body wants. And this is what you see in animals, because the mind is not so developed. They will go and eat some grass and they will get cured of their illness, and normally they don't eat that grass. But this is body consciousness. Below that is a grade where the cells themselves at an individual level have an awareness. But that level is fundamentally subconscious. So if you try to enter into that state of consciousness by identification, you will go into a sleep-like state. And because you're sleepy, you don't register it and you can do nothing about it. So it already takes a degree of mastery of your consciousness. You must be already free of mind awareness in order to be able to enter into the subconscious without losing consciousness and bring into it a higher consciousness. And there you can be aware of the cells as they feel themselves and the habit that they have, and you can even work to change those. So we would describe, strictly speaking, as a cellular consciousness. What many people have experienced and described, and that is possibly what U.G. Krishnamurti has described, is changes happening in the body consciousness or in the body's working which he feels at a cellular level. This would be different from the work that the mother did, which was to enter the cell consciousness itself, to see what the cells craved, and to awaken in the cells an aspiration for the divine. That would require a far greater mastery. Yes, yes. But that working is all subconscious, so it needs a great skill to be able to enter into it. Yes.
You have to be gifted to do it?
Gifting is...
Because right from birth he was...
a gift is still an advantage of a starting point. After that, you still have to develop the skill, the potentiality. So gifts are useful at best as a starting point. I don't like the kind of phrasing where you say somebody is chosen because you don't explain why and or what it means. If you say someone is chosen, has a gift, I would ask, where did the gift come from and why did he have it and not someone else? And when you look deeper, you'll find eventually behind that is effort. Even as somebody who is born with a musical talent, it's because in a previous life he has developed that capacity which remained imprinted in his consciousness and was carried over. That's the gift. But the gift had a whole base for developing it. So rather than saying someone is gifted, I will say, let's see how we can make more efficient, more rapid, or get to the same thing more quickly. And if you have worked on it before, you have an advantage. But if you have not worked on it before, we can still attain to it quickly because you can receive the gift, so to say, from the part in you where it's already there, in the potentiality of the soul, or in the divine consciousness that fills you. The full potential is there. Mother goes so far as to say, even the hand imprint of consciousness of certain great musicians is there in the universal. And you can tune into that and receive that as a gift. Someone made an effort, but that someone's effort can be imprinted in your consciousness now. And you receive it. And you don't have to go through that same effort. You may have to make a little effort to perfect it. But you have the head start already. The gift is there now. So in this particular yoga, we do rely on the gift of the divine grace. For anything we do, when in that part we open ourselves and invoke the divine grace, she has already the imprint of what is needed and can imprint it straight in our consciousness, imprint even a new habit, a new capacity as a gift. If we are sufficiently receptive, plastic, and giving to her in surrender. And then that thing can be just imprinted and you have the gift right there in a very short time. There will be still some skill of perfecting, some exercise of effort to make complete and imprint permanently. But the gift is given. And this is the advantage of the approach of the yoga itself. So even for this, we can ask for the gift, we can aspire and invoke Mother's help to help us develop this more and more deeply, and whatever we have done, to take it to still higher levels of attainment.
So now I go home, I disconnect the mind from the body,
Mm-hmm.
and I can read and study the whole night instead of sleeping.
Yes, absolutely, you can.
And then I continue the next day.
So remember the guideline that we also take care not to take it so far that we keep the body in the right order as far as we can. So we can, in principle, push the body beyond its limits until the body begins to break down. And still the mind can remain free and continue to do what it wants until the body breaks down completely. You can do does not mean you should do. So we have to respect the body. We have to respect the body. But the ability for the mind to be free of the body's condition is what we are aiming at. And then from that freedom, we will even imprint in the body a greater freedom. But the first requirement, our focus right now is not so much to push the body's limits. It's to get free of the body consciousness itself and identification. And the mind is like this. The part of the mind thinking, you can visualize like a tree, the trunk, where you say, I'm conscious. And then there are portions which extend like roots all the way down deep into the body consciousness. Fine tendrils going down to the most inconscient parts of the body. And so when we say, I am standing back, it's the trunk of the tree saying, I am above the ground. But not realizing that all the roots are going still and are embedded in the ground. And you are going to gradually somehow pull those roots out. And the thickest parts of the roots will come out first, and the fine threads will still remain embedded. So you'll say, oh, now I am so free, I can will myself to be conscious even when I am sleepy, and rise above the sleepiness of the body and think clearly. I can do that, but still there are tendrils going finer inside. And if the body finds itself breaking down, it can still knock you out. You blink and your eyes don't open, you've gone into unconscious sleep. It's, it's but the point being, there are so many degrees even of this separation. And let's see how far we can push it. We continue next Friday. Oh